So, I missed 2 robots from the last video. In fact, if I'd continued the way I was, I would have missed a bunch of robots. Mostly they were from the Celebrity Special of Series 9 and the World Series that was in Series 10, because yes, they both count for this list. So I made this handy planning spreadsheet so that now I have every robot planned and I won't miss any. He says, this also allowed me to structure it so that each installment of this series will contain the same amount of robots, instead of structuring it letter by letter, because putting all of the T's in one video would make it 3 hours long, and putting all the J's in one video would make a video that's about 5 minutes. So at least this means I can keep the series somewhat ordered. Anyway, enough from me, back to the robots.
From Eastleigh, Arena Cleaner.
This is a robot that I missed in the last video because the robots that appeared in the Series 9 Celebrity Special didn't appear on the wiki page I was using. Never heard of it before? Well, don't worry, nobody really remembers this special either. A team of celebrities would work with an established roboteer to help them build their own robots. Weapon design and bodywork was fully custom, however most of the internals were all stock, provided by the producers. For example, all the robots featured in the 2 episodes had the same pair of wheels, which were all external. Arena Cleaner was entered by radio DJ Scott Mills and Chris Stark under the mentorship of Dave Moulds, team captain of Team Carbide. And oh boy, could you tell, because almost all of the other machines were distinctive in how they looked and had their own identity. Arena Cleaner didn't. It was just a Carbide clone. Except for the wheels being on the outside and being painted baby blue instead of green. But I suppose if you're going to copy anybody, copy the best. Arena Cleaner lived up to its name as it won the first of the 2 special episodes. It tore Interstellar MML to shreds immediately. Sure, it suffered a fairly swift loss at the hands of fellow spinner Cat, but it rebounded fast to deliver a one-hit KO of Jar to make it to the grand final. In a rematch with Cat, it completely turned the tables, as Arena Cleaner immobilized Cat within 2 attacks before being crowned the winner. Arena Cleaner was later repurposed to be used as a stock robot in the World Series during Series 10, but since it was rechristened and treated as a totally separate robot even though anyone with eyes could tell that it wasn't, I'll get its own segment on this list. Because apparently I just love making more work for myself. This was the other robot I missed. I don't know how, because it did appear on a main series episode that wasn't the Celebrity Special. Armageddon was a lightweight competitor in the side events for Series 2, although I'll be honest, I reckon I could have left this one off the list and none of you would have noticed. Armageddon was a wedge-shaped robot armed with only a static spike that, despite attending the auditions unfinished, was allowed to compete on TV. Well, I say on TV, but Armageddon's total screen time could be measured in milliseconds, as it only briefly appeared in a single camera shot during the entire highlight package that was the Series 2 lightweight battle. It was seen being harassed by one of the house robots. It didn't win, and in fact it wasn't even mentioned by name during the show. And would you believe this actually isn't the least we know about a competitor on the show, since another robot in that very same battle wasn't even shown on TV, nor do we even know its name. We only know of its existence because it shows up in nearly all audience accounts. And yes, that robot will have a segment on this list.
From Blackburn in Lancashire, B.O.D.
I think it really epitomises how much spinners were taking over the robot combat scene that by the show's 7th series, almost every new entry was trying to incorporate some kind of spinner, regardless of their robot's other characteristics, with mixed results. B.O.D was one such robot, nothing more than a Lexan plastic box with a helicopter-style spinner on the top. The armour was weak, the ground clearance was large, and the blades were actually so small they had to get within centimetres of opponents to do any damage. The position of the weapon also meant that it had no Shremek. Again, in Series 7, if you didn't have a Shremek, then your days were numbered. B.O.D only competed in Series 7, with the team's former machine failing to qualify for Series 6. It was placed in a fairly difficult group battle, fearsome international team Tough as Nails, former Annihilator champions in Disco Inferno, and Robo Chicken was there. B.O.D's weapon immediately ground to a halt after only landing one weak hit on Robo Chicken, while Tough as Nails immediately disposed of Disco Inferno. Robo Chicken then effortlessly flipped B.O.D over. When a perennial joke bot is tossing your robot like a sack of potatoes, you know you've built a pile of scrap. Unfortunately for the team from Blackburn, Tough as Nails was unable to pit Robo Chicken before they were counted out by the ref bot. They then suffered the humiliation of having their robot's corpse pelted with bowling balls and then dumped down the pit, never to be seen again.
From Bradford, Backstabber.
The early series of the show produced some wacky designs, with the sport still being fairly new and the meta not yet being set in stone. As a result, you could get robots like Backstabber. Built by a technical college in Bradford, it only fought in Series 3 and lost in the first round. The only notable thing about it was that it fought Razor. Yes, this was the Razor that failed to win a single battle in Series 2, but that was due to reliability, or lack thereof. Take that out of the equation, and early series Razor was just as deadly as the monster that we all know it became. And I mean, look at this thing. What do you think happened to it? Although having said that, it wasn't crushed into scrap metal, its tall shape proving difficult for Razor to grab. Instead, it broke down only a matter of seconds into the fight, leaving Razor with the easy task of pitting a dead machine. As a result, Backstabber became the first opponent to ever lose a fight to Razor. The first of many.
From Haarlem in Holland, Bamm Bamm.
Yep, another robot that went one and done in the tail end of the classic series. I promise you there are some actually notable robots in this episode, please don't click away. Bamm Bamm was a low circular robot with a pneumatic spike axe. A Dutch robot, it certainly had more success in its home country, making the grand final of both of the Dutch series of Robot Wars, but when it entered the UK arena for Series 7 it couldn't replicate its success. Being placed in the same group battle as number 2 seed and 3-time grand finalist Firestorm 5 didn't help, but the other two opponents should be beatable for a grand final caliber machine. An as yet unproven clusterbot in the form of Black and Blue, and the newcomer in the form of Daisy Cutter. During the fight, Bamm Bamm chose to attack Black and Blue, and while it successfully hit its target, Firestorm 5 then flipped over both opponents in one fell swoop. Bamm Bamm then suffered true mech failure and was left stuck on its back before being pitted by Firestorm.
From Huddersfield, Banshee.
Honestly, one of my favourite types of robot, more common in the early series, that were very clearly a result of a group that had a metal box and excessive amounts of papier-mâché. Banshee very much fit into this category. Designed to be a full-body spinner, but it could only achieve a speed of 200 RPM. It wasn't even a Wish.com version of Typhoon 2, it was a Wish.com version of Corkscrew. As it was also slow, which meant that it was easily tossed around the arena by the pneumatic spike of Spawn of Scudder, ending up on its side. The house robots descended and Banshee was decapitated, and had its head cooked over the flames. The house enjoyed flame-broiled Banshee, much to the amusement of Jonathan Pierce.
From Horsham in West Sussex, Barbaric Response.
Barbaric Response was a flipper powered by a car fire extinguisher. It could operate at 10 bar, but was regulated as the team decided that a high-pressure flipper design would be too time-consuming to build in time for Series 5, resorted to a low-pressure one instead. It was also slow, as it struggled to get traction on the arena floor, suffering terribly from wheel spin. It didn't qualify for Series 5, but did make it into Series 6. It was lucky to survive the first round melee, as the three opponents were all outclassed by Exterminator, while Barbaric Response mostly focused on attacking Spirit of Scorpion. Eventually, both Robo Chicken and Spirit of Scorpion broke down, as did Barbaric Response. It was pitted by Exterminator, but the judges ruled that they were the last to be immobilized and were thus safe from elimination. At least it was well built, as the team reported no structural damage after the fight. It then drew one of the shortest straws by having to fight the number 3 seed Firestorm 4 in round 2. It initially put up a fight, partly due to some smart driving and partly due to Firestorm being distracted by thoughts of violence against the ref bot, but Barbaric Response was always going to be outclassed. It eventually ended up stuck against the arena wall, unable to self-right. It wasn't counted out since Refbot was preoccupied, so it had to be counted out by the judges instead. The pneumatic system was uprated to 16 bar by the time the Extreme 2 rolled around, as Barbaric Response teamed up with Hydra for the Tag Team Terror Tournament. Here it put up a better showing for itself, with it and Hydra reaching the title fight against Bulldog Breed and Robo Chicken. Here it starred in another of the show's funnier moments as it broke down in the fight and then had its immobile corpse pecked at by Robo Chicken, causing Jonathan Pierce to descend into a giggling fit. For Series 7, Barbaric Response was drawn into a group battle alongside an unknown quantity in the Grim Reaper, a future 2-time champion in Big Nipper, and the defending Annihilator champion in Can Opener. It would be eliminated by judge's decision along with Can Opener, after the pair had spent the entire fight locked in a shoving match after Can Opener sunk its claws into the wheel guards and Barbaric Response couldn't get free even with House Robot assistance. Following the cancellation of the classic show, Barbaric Response gradually morphed into a very respectable competitor on the live circuit, achieving modest success with several highlights. These included finishing runner-up at the 2004 Robot Rumble, including 2 fights where it dominated Exterminator only to go on to lose both fights, runner-up at Burgess Hill in 2008, causing major upset by defeating Chronic the Wedgehog, a former UK champion don't forget, only to lose to Iron Ore 5 in the final. It would take its revenge in an event at Reading, beating Iron Ore to win its first trophy, in a campaign that also saw a victory over Dan Tomkia. 2009 saw it win at Burgess Hill and finish 4th overall in the UK Heavyweight Championship. The robot was retired from combat in 2013.
From Horsham, Barber-Ous.
One of the most unique designs in the history of the show. Take a barber's pole and turn it into a spinning drum. Mind you, this wasn't a robot with a spinning drum attached. No, the whole robot was just a spinning drum attached to a pair of wheels as an outrigger. Built for Series 5, after the team's previous mod had failed to qualify for Series 4, Barber-Ous' strength was that it was made of plastic. Its weakness was that it was made of plastic. The Series 5 Barber-Ous featured a much narrower drum and bulkier support structures than the later versions, but the ethos was much the same from the start. This initial Barber-Ous' first fight was in Series 5 against former champion Panic Attack, and while it did damage the weapon of Panic Attack, its fatal flaw was first seen, that it did just as much damage to itself as it ever did to opponents. The drum stopped spinning, and then the robot started smoking before being pitted by the ever-reliable Panic Attack. Barber-Ous 2 returned for Series 6, heavily upgraded and sporting a more familiar, wider drum design. It drew the short straw of being placed in the group battle alongside Hypnodisc, but then again its two opponents were Granny's Revenge 2 and 4x4, two robots that would be contenders for the worst bots in the whole series. Really, all Barber-Ous had to do was survive any more than 15 seconds in the battle, which it did, although between battles they found out the Hypnodisc had still managed to damage their wheel system, so they had to switch to a new improvised and untested design. Fortunately, this design proved superior and Barber-Ous put in unquestionably its best performance against Cat 3 in the second round, comprehensively beating the Axebot and tossing it around the arena. But this joy was extinguished very swiftly by Hypnodisc as the three-time grand finalist delivered a sensational one-hit KO. However, the drum still had life, so Hypnodisc took no chances and battered Barber-Ous several more times before dumped the Barber's pole in the pit. Barber-Ous' campaign in Extreme 2 consisted of the Challenge Bout episode where it was placed in an opening melee against Iron Ore 2, Vader and Terahertz, the latter fresh off the back of a grand final appearance. The battle started well, Terahertz and Barber-Ous cornered Iron Ore and Vader, with Vader breaking down there and then. However, Iron Ore turned the tables on Barber-Ous and along with Terahertz enacted revenge until Barber-Ous started smoking and appeared to grind to a halt. Iron Ore then got its axe stuck in Barber-Ous' shell, causing the former to topple over onto its back and be unable to self-right. The judges were called on to make a decision on who would progress alongside Terahertz, and they sided with Iron Ore, determining that it had been the last to be immobilized. A slightly improved version for Series 7, dubbed Barber-Ous 2 and a bit, was placed in a much easier heat opener with Thunderpants, Leveler and Tetanus Booster. Thunderpants then broke down in the entry gate, leaving the other three robots to fight alone. This was a fight that was very winnable for Barber-Ous. It started well, looking on course to beat out Leveler 2 and progress, until once again it proved that it did just as much damage to itself as it did to others, knocking itself out in an attempt to attack Leveler. It was counted out and eliminated at the first hurdle. It also lost the only special event that it took part in, that being the spinner-only melee with Shredder Evolution and Infernal Contraption, taking its total win-loss ratio to 2 and 5, a stat which definitely reflects more on its reliability than its effectiveness, as on its day, Barber-Ous was a very good spinner. Team captain Simon Rafferty improved Barber-Ous and also built an Axebot to compete alongside it for a prospective 8th series in 2004, but a series that never happened. He held out for a long time, keeping the robots in working conditions should a reboot ever happen. However, in 2015 he gave up and scrapped both machines. And then the reboot was announced a matter of months later.
From Hagley Roman Catholic High School, Barry.
And now we have arrived at the first robot from Series 1 of the show. The oldest of the old, and oh boy does it show for these machines. Barry did have promise, a very heavy machine at almost 120 kilos, yes, this was before the weight limit was standardised. In an era of the show before active weaponry really took over, Barry's bulk, big tyres and front scoop meant that it would be a robot that would easily be able to push others around. However, Barry was hindered by radio interference problems that affected its control, but also by these small caster wheels on the back. During its gauntlet run, these small wheels dropped through a grill in the arena floor, and due to the robot's low ground clearance, for the time, this left Barry stuck and unable to move, resulting in its early elimination. This was then made to sting even more by the fact that the next round, the trial, was a sumo round against the house robot, Barry's main strength, but also because it lost out into the gauntlet over one of 3 stock robots built by the production company to fill out the roster. But these robots, due to conflicts of interest, were not permitted to progress beyond the trial. As a result, the driver of the stock bot of the sumo round just didn't even try and immediately drove off the edge.
From Brentford in Middlesex, Bash Gordon.
In Extreme 2, the producers organised a new Blood Championship, consisting of robots that had never appeared on the show before. It's not exactly remembered for producing good quality machines, instead it's more so remembered for being utterly steamrolled by Storm 2, who beat out Mute in the title fight, with these two robots being the only ones who ever achieved anything in the subsequent 7th series. I mean, I guess you could also say this championship featured Thor, which would go on to become a very competent machine in the hiatus years and the reboot, but come on, are you really going to look me in the eyes and say that these two machines are the same? Swimming around in this stagnant pool of awfulness was Bash Gordon, a robot with a yellow trapezoidal shape that made it look like a Wish.com version of Atomic. It had a small overhead axe that theoretically could double as a flipper. Big emphasis on the theoretically though, because everything about the robot was untested in battle. It lost in the first round of its heat after Cedric Slammer made its armour look like butter, slicing right through it. This one attack in turn slashed through the drive chain, leaving Bash Gordon without drive on one side and therefore functionally immobile. It slowly hobbled over towards the pit as if begging to be put out of its misery. Cedric Slammer obliged, but not before flaying the shell of Bash Gordon some more.
From knowledge, beast.
For context, and also because somebody asked on the last episode, yes, this robot did used to have a very stupid name consisting of lots of numbers that I could have very easily put into the last video, but I'm using this later name because 1, the wiki page lumped the two of them together, and 2, because I am not saying H645T for an entire segment. You can't make me. Built for Series 5, the original Beast featured a wedge design and a rear-hinged flipper, but one with a unique design addition. A tall spiked axe that was designed to allow Beast to have both a flipper and an axe, running off of one mechanism. However, this added weight compromised the flipper's power and also meant the robot's self-righting abilities were greatly hindered. It won its first battle, aided by the weapon of T-Bone being broken from the onset. It fell at the next hurdle to the robot that could just never quite win a heat, Smithy. Beast was thoroughly outclassed, being pushed around by Smithy, taking damage from the house robots and then getting stranded on its back. After failing to qualify for Series 6, Beast 2 returned to the Warzone for Series 7, taking on a chassis and external flipper design similar to that of Bigger Brother. However, it would be nowhere near as successful as the robot that it took inspiration from, as this second Beast was eliminated in the first round of its heat after being propped up on the arena sidewall by Thermidor 2, its long axe once again preventing it from being able to self-right. Beast was one of the robots whose career continued into the live circuit that followed Robot-Wars' first cancellation. Over time, it underwent a complete makeover. It dropped the silly name and the troublesome axe weapon, focusing solely on the flipper. In an effort to increase the flipper's power, the team took weight shedding to the extreme. By the time of Beast's return for Series 8, the robot no longer had any traditional bodywork at all, instead sporting a tubular exoskeleton that meant the robot's internals were on full display. It would qualify from its group battle without any scares, but it would lose all 3 of its head-to-head to finish bottom of the group. Its wheel got lunched by Ironside 3, it then suffered drive problems hereafter, and was immobilised by 2 hits from Pulsar, and in its final fight with Gabriel, was marked by Beast being barely a functioning robot, fighting without a weapon as its flipper had broken in between bouts. It limped around the arena, and it actually drew leniency from its opponent, as Gabriel largely held off from attacking the clearly dying machine, once it became clear that Beast was functionally immobile. The team only realised after filming had concluded that one of the magnets in the motors had broken after the first head-to-head, and this is what caused all their drive problems. Beast wasn't selected for Series 9, and a new variant was built for Series 10. Christened Harpy, this machine brought back the axe weapon by making it interchangeable with the flipper, although this machine went unused as a reserve for Series 10. After Robot-Wars was cancelled again, both Beast and Harpy returned to the live circuit, where they still compete to this day, with highlights including a 3rd place finish in the 2018 Extreme Robots Championship and a runner-up placing at the 2020 Robo Riots event in Dublin.
From Cornwall, Beast of Bodmin.
The only machine to be a heavyweight successor to a former champion, Beast of Bodmin was built by the team from Bodmin Technical College, whose previous entry Roadblock had been the first ever champion of Robot Wars, before making another grand final appearance the series after. Functionally, Beast of Bodmin was an evolution of Roadblock, a wide wedge design with a rear circular saw blade, now custom built. The only weapon changes was a small flicker near the base of the wedge. I'm sorry, but it's too small to be called a flipper. On Robot Wars, size does matter. However, where Beast of Bodmin differed from its predecessor was in the armour. It was now covered in fiberglass instead of being made from aluminium road signs. Losing the iconic look, the team decked out the robot in the county colours of Cornwall, which if you're American is where Bodmin is, and naming the robot after the Cornish urban legend of a big cat that supposedly stalked the Bodmin moor, killing farmers' livestock. It also featured a pair of eyes designed to blink at the press of a button, but of course these served no practical purpose. In Series 3, it suffered a scare in the first round of its heat as the weapon of Crusher sliced through the fiberglass body like butter, but they were saved by one of Crusher's tracks coming loose, leaving the robot immobile. It then overturned Onslaught in the second round and delivered an iconic moment by winking towards the camera after doing so. It then pulled off a come-from-behind victory against Invertebrat in the heat final, after initially being on the ropes, with several well-timed drives putting Invertebrat in the territory of the house robots, until eventually it lost drive on one side. In the first round of the semi-final, it put on a more convincing display as it dominated Blade and eventually turned it over onto its back. However, it fell to the surprise package of Series 3, Stegosaurus, just one fight away from the grand final. Beast of Bodmin was always slow and cumbersome, but a tiring machine was no match for the faster Stegosaurus, the latter running rings around the former champion and ramming it to repeatedly until Beast of Bodmin ground to a halt and ended its career with a flip from the floor hazard.
From Barnsley in Yorkshire, Bee-Capitator.
A rotating drill weapon was the kind of weapon that you'd come up with when brainstorming ideas for a robot over a couple of beers with your mates, but then quickly realise that it's utterly useless in practice. As such, they were almost non-existent beyond Series 3, but Bee-Capitator was one of the last robots to feature this weapon, appearing in Series 5. Armed with only an outdated weapon and sporting flammable bodywork, this machine screamed novelty bots that would suffer a first round exit, and so it was. It came up against Firestorm 3 in the first round of its heat, with the number 7 seed easily tossing the Bee over, and of course Bee-Capitator didn't have a Shroomek. At least the encounter would live on in the memory of the Firestorm team, as this was one of the rare occasions that their machine suffered major damage, and that was when Matilda buckled its flipper. What, did you expect Bee-Capitator to have done that? No, it was left a smouldering wreck down in the pit.
From Broadheath, Manchester, Beefcake.
Beefcake was a featherweight machine that fought in the Featherweight Championship of Extreme 1, and by championship I mean a one-off 1v1 fight. But hey, the title's a title. This fight was against RC Warrior, and although Beefcake won in memorable fashion, taking advantage of its opponent getting stuck on the unopened pit panel to lower them into the pit without even having to push them in, it's better remembered for what happened after. Despite having won, it then decided to attack the house robots. As a featherweight. 400 kilograms of Sakilolot versus 12 kilogram featherweight. What do you think was going to happen? Side note, Jonathan Pierce's commentary of this moment is hilarious. So Beefcake was a winner, but it was also a crushed mechanical insect on the arena floor.
From Hemel Hempstead and number 6 seed, Behemoth.
If there was ever a main character of Robot Wars, it would be Behemoth. A virtual ever-present throughout the show's history, appearing in 6 of the 7 classic series, both series of Extreme and all 3 of the reboot series, Behemoth has appeared in more episodes than any other robot, and has fought in more battles than any other robot in the history of the show. The saga of Behemoth is a great story, a story that spans 20 years that saw initial optimism followed by prolonged bad luck and a personal nadir, before bouncing back to the end in elation. Behemoth's core design philosophy remained the same throughout its entire career, that of a Lexan plate and titania-coated shell equipped with a front lifting scoop. This was a low-pressure weapon, not the high-pressure flippers you might be used to that send opponents soaring through the air. Lower pressure meant more total flips per fight and allowed Behemoth to continuously harass and turn over a machine. Each subsequent version of Behemoth was given an EVO designation followed by a number. The team from Hemel Hempstead, then in their teens and early 20s, made their debut in Series 2. Behemoth Evo 1 was by far the most bare bones and basic version, and was far smaller than its successors, and was a hodgepodge of parts borrowed or donated by neighbours and relatives. After cruising through the gauntlet and the trial, it then drew Elvis in the first of the Heat semi-finals, which was basically a free win. Contrary to later series Behemoth, the team actually had some fortune, as it was placed in the same heat as Razor, but wouldn't have to fight it in the Heat final because the future all-star that was Razor broke down in the middle of dominating Inquisitor. Instead, Behemoth would fight a hastily repaired Inquisitor, lifting and pushing it into the waiting jaws of the house robots. The semi-finals of Series 2 were similar to the Heats in that they included both gauntlets and trials, meaning 2 robots were eliminated before any arena combat took place. It overall had a shakier performance in both pre-arena segments, but did still do enough to progress. In a head-to-head for a place in the grand final, Behemoth fought Killatron. The latter's axe proved too powerful for Behemoth's armour as it cleaved straight through before being used as leverage to pull Behemoth over on its side. Behemoth Evo 2, with 7 months of work and £1,400 pumped into its redesign, was significantly bigger than Evo 1, including the scoop. While its drive power had also been increased, the lifting capacity of the scoop had actually been decreased. It also featured a pair of axes as auxiliary weapons at the rear. This version of Behemoth was breezing through its heat in Series 3, easily and effectively turning over both Shark Attack and General Carnage, placing itself as the favourite in the heat final with Pitbull, even if its opponent did have a design that couldn't be fully inverted. It was a close fight, but one Behemoth was still certainly in with a shot at winning, turning over Pitbull as well as having several sustained drives, until it drove over an Arena Spike, which turned them up and over onto their side. As the team hadn't incorporated a Shriemek yet, Behemoth's campaign was over. Series 3 could definitely be viewed as a heat victory that got away for the Behemoth team. This feeling of having underachieved was then emphasised when Behemoth put in a great showing to finish runner-up in the first World Championship, only losing to Razor, who exploited Behemoth's other main weakness, weak side armour. Behemoth Evo 3 was built for Series 4. This one ditched the rear axes and incorporated a Shriemek, as well as featuring an upgraded gearbox design. Seeded 6th for the series off the back of its impressive World Championship performance, Behemoth saw off a challenge from the newcomers of Arnold Terminator and Rambot. It then easily flipped over Judge Shred 2, advancing to a third successive heat final. Here it suffered another onset of bad luck, as while in the middle of a close fight with Exterminator 2, Behemoth started moving more and more sluggishly, allowing the tide to turn in the favour of Exterminator. Team Captain Ant Pritchard stated afterwards that after their second fight, they had to replace a slipped cog in the gearbox, and that he thought the replacement cog also slipped midway through the subsequent fight, hampering Behemoth's mobility. It also competed in Series 4 Southern Annihilator, where it once again got chewed up by Razor, so severely that it was forced to withdraw, finishing 4th overall. A fourth version of Behemoth was built following the weight increase. Behemoth Evo 4 was now 20 kg heavier, faster, more durable, sported an overhead axe weapon. In the first round of the Extremes All-Star Tournament, Behemoth shrugged off several hits from Hypnodisc, gradually wearing down the then two-time grand finalist until it ground to a halt. Behemoth truly showed how durability was one of its greatest strengths. Well, except for maybe the scoop. This was then emphasised in the quarterfinals when Razor crushed the scoop like a baked bean tin. Despite flipping Razor over multiple times after this, the prior damage sustained came back to bite them, as the judges ruled in Razor's favour by just a single point. This marked Behemoth's third loss to the Dorset machine in as many series. It also fought in a wildcard battle with the Spider. This was the only fight in Behemoth's TV career where Team Captain Ant didn't drive the machine, as he'd become ill prior to the fight. With brother Michael at the controls, Behemoth became the first robot to get an Uta with a lifting scoop, hoisting the newcomer over the wall. However, in its next fight showed on TV, a mayhem battle alongside Stinger and Thermidor 2, Behemoth itself would suffer the same fate, being flung over the arena wall by Thermidor's flipper in spectacular fashion. Perhaps it was proof of Behemoth's status as a capable machine that never quite had luck on its side, that despite failing to make the semi-finals 2 years in a row, it was still seeded 15th for Series 5. In round 1, it earned a decisive victory over the deadly, but as of then unproven, Supernova, flipping and herding the spinner around the arena until eventually leaving Matilda to deliver the killing blow. However, they were left stunned by another newcomer, Crustacean, in the second round. A drive from the new machine left Behemoth stranded up against the arena wall, which made self-righting difficult, and once Crustacean had a good enough grip on them, it dragged Behemoth into the pit. It was a fight that they were certainly expected to win, but I don't know if I'd say this is yet another heat victory to escape, given that a prospective heat final bout would have been against Wheelie Big Cheese, who itself was fresh from sending Axor into orbit. Behemoth Evo 5 was the most extensive rebuild since Series 3. Externally, the robot was nearly identical, except for a new scoop, but internally was another matter. Behemoth wasn't 4-wheel drive anymore, it was 6-wheel drive, and the robot was now much faster. Series 6 is when Behemoth truly started to feel like an underdog, not because it was always outclassed by its opponents, quite the opposite. Behemoth was often competitive and capable of very convincing wins. It was just that by this point, something had always gone wrong, so you were left waiting for that inevitable moment, be it a breakdown or an unlucky draw. Behemoth wasn't even seeded anymore, usurped by newer, better machines. In its heat melee, it was torn to pieces by Disco Inferno, only being spared a round 1 exit because 2 opponents had already been counted out. Not that it was much consolation to the team, who now had a mammoth repair job to do. They got it done though, only to be rewarded with a draw against the runner-up from the previous series' bigger brother. Despite confidence before the battle that Behemoth could prove a match for the number 2 seed, it wasn't to be. Things started well, with Behemoth turning over bigger brother twice in quick succession, but things just as quickly went sideways, quite literally. Behemoth was flipped on its side, slammed into the wall, and then pitted in that order. Behemoth appeared in multiple competitions in the second series of Extreme. It fought in the Iron Maidens tournament, where the robot was driven and operated by Michael Pritchard's girlfriend and Ant Pritchard's mother. who had always supported the team from day one. After surviving a melee with Cat 3 and Reptilian, it was then the subject of illegal house robot interference in a semi-final bout with Chompalot, as Shunt left his CPZ in order to right the as of then immobile Chompalot, before Shunt then later knocked loose Behemoth's removable link, rendering it immobile. This same fate then happened again in its appearance in the University Challenge, representing the University of Hertfordshire. It was dominating a fight against CV and Infernal Contraption, only for the link to become damaged once again and Behemoth to be rendered suddenly immobile. Following the reliability issues that it had suffered, Behemoth was stripped down once again before Series 7, receiving upgraded internals and a more sturdy removable link. Behemoth regained its seeded status, largely due to many of the old guard of Robot Wars dropping out before Series 7, such as Razor, Chaos 2 and Hypnodisc. Behemoth absolutely dominated its opening melee, securing a KO on Tartarus immediately, before later avenging its loss to Crustacean by hoisting the crab over the arena wall. Behemoth was back. Unfortunately, so was the luck, or lack thereof. Behemoth's round 2 clash with Mute is in my mind the perfect example of Behemoth's unfortunate history. No other robot can say they lost a bout due to their opponent's self-righting with such force that it killed them. But when Mute flipped over and landed on Behemoth, it stuck the Hemmer Hempstead machine in forward gear, causing it to careen all over the arena with absolutely no control. Given that Mute would then advance to the semi-finals after beating Judge Shred, I think it would be fair to say that Series 7 is yet another heat that got away from Behemoth. Throughout the show's hiatus, Behemoth would undergo constant rebuilds and upgrades that allowed it to always remain competitive on the live circuit, finishing 3rd in the 2005 UK Championships and winning the 2006 Roving Robots Winter Tour. By the time Series 8 rolled around, the Pritchards and Kane Aston were no longer the fresh-faced boys who had appeared on the show almost 20 years earlier. Similarly, Behemoth was no longer the same, now onto its 9th evolution. It featured a fully modular chassis with increased titanium armour as well as more potent pneumatics, while the axe weapon had been ditched entirely. It progressed through its heat melee without much trouble, securing a KO on Bonk, a robot built by the same team who had built old enemy Mute. It then earned a fairly easy judge's decision against Nuts in the first head-to-head, before defeating an axeless Terahertz by KO in a battle of Roboteering veterans. The final head-to-head didn't go anywhere near as well, however. Instead, Behemoth would be one of many to end up on Carbide's highlight reel, the spinner slicing through Behemoth's titanium scoop like a knife through butter, ripping it from its mountings before being pitted. It still did well enough to earn a heat final place against Carbide, the robot that had just torn Behemoth a new one. This also made it the 3rd time in one episode that Carbide and Behemoth faced each other in battle. This battle was just as one-sided as the last, with Behemoth suffering mobility issues throughout, which worsened with each punishing blow that it suffered until eventually it drove into the pit of its own accord. For Series 9, Behemoth sought to upgrade their versatility, bringing an array of interchangeable scoops for any robot they may fight, including an angled wedge to defend against spinners like Carbide, a clamping jaw scoop to better grab awkwardly shaped opponents like Nuts. It was given the nod by the judges to progress from its group battle alongside Eruption. A head-to-head with Eruption went less well, with Behemoth being thrown out of the arena via the entry gates. It secured a KO victory against the spinner of PP3D after the latter suffered spectacular internal component failure, sparks flying everywhere. This left Behemoth with one more fight, against Cherub. The points were situated in a way that meant whoever won this fight would progress to the heat final at the expense of the other. Prior to the battle, the team wanted to test their new experimental grabber scoop in combat as they hadn't used it yet. Ant, however, was resistant to the idea of using an untested weapon in a bout where willing really mattered. He was outvoted though, and Behemoth entered the arena with the grabbers equipped. This would prove to be a grave mistake, as the grabbers immediately crumpled under the first contact with Cherub, leaving Behemoth with great difficulty getting under and clamping down on its opponent. At one point, a drive from Behemoth saw Cherub headed for the floor flipper, but the hazard was fired too early and Cherub ended up wedged between the flipper mechanism and the floor. The judges had each robot return to their starting positions and the battle resumed, ruling that Cherub's situation wasn't a legal knockout as it was due to equipment failure, and thus Cherub couldn't be considered immobile. This combined with the failing weapon experiment was two immense frustrations for Ant, a man who admits that he takes robot combat very seriously. But what happened next was unprecedented, never happening before or since on the show. When a final judge's decision came down on the side of Cherub, Ant simply walked out of the booth and back to the pits while the cameras were still rolling, relaying his frustrations with the team's decisions. When the episode first aired, this attracted a lot of attention from the media, both news and social, with many erroneously reporting the reasons that Ant had walked off stage. The dominant narrative was simply that Ant was an upset man-child who couldn't handle being beaten by children when he'd been doing robot combat for longer than they'd been alive, In reality, of course, nothing could be further from the truth, and not only confirmed this in the very episode that his quote-unquote outburst happened, but then confirmed it in a statement he released after the episode aired. It's kind of sad that the only time the rebooted series ever got any significant attention was just for clickbait and lazy journalism. Series 9 was rock bottom for Behemoth, but Series 10 would see its redemption. The grabbers were ditched and the pneumatics were reworked once again. It would progress through the group battle once again on a judge's decision, as it and Sabretooth had both been immobilised at the same time, but Behemoth was deemed to have been given the best performance throughout the battle. This meant that it progressed straight through to the Heat semi-finals where it faced the Swarm, made up of 4 separate clusterbots. Behemoth picked off each one individually to earn the victory, including tossing one out of the arena. It would face former champions Apollo in the Heat final. How many times had Behemoth been here and failed? Then it would have been favourite, now it was the underdog, which only made it what happened next all the more special. Behemoth held its own before seizing its moment, a strong drive and a flip sending Apollo down into the pit to give Behemoth his first televised Heat victory since Series 2, 19 years prior. Ever-present judge Professor Noel Sharkey remarked that it was the best he'd ever seen Behemoth perform, but Jonathan Pierce said it best.
Behemoth, the greatest moment in 20 years! 20 years of hurt and grief! Endless new celebrations and frustration for Apollo!
Behemoth would therefore appear in its first ever grand final. While it lost in the group battle to a tactical piece of driving from Nuts 2, it would score another David vs Goliath win against the hugely destructive Magnetar. Despite suffering heavy damage, Behemoth refused to die and the wounded machine had just enough life in it to hoist over Magnetar, who consequently suffered tree mech failure. However, one hurdle for the title bout, a fight with the eventual champions Eruption, proved to be the one the underdog couldn't win. Behemoth would therefore finish third for the series alongside Nuts 2. Finally, the Series 2 Behemoth was no longer the most successful, and all the bad memories of both the distant and recent past had been dispelled and given way to elation. In 2021, it was inducted into the Combat Robot Hall of Fame. It was due to compete at the inaugural Mechmania event in 2024 to be filmed and released on Mech Plus as a web series, but Ant couldn't get the machine ready in time and couldn't attend. Still, Behemoth is the ultimate veteran of Robot Wars combat in the UK, appearing in more series, more episodes and more fights than any other machine. The ups and downs of its career are reflected in the distinctions that it holds. 29 combat victories places it in the top 10 in the show's history. However, its 20 losses mean that it has the dubious honour of having the most televised losses in the show's history. It scored 3 Utas, the only ones ever done by a lifting scoop, but at the same time was the only robot to be on the receiving end of an Uta on 3 separate occasions. Since the pandemic, Behemoth has appeared less frequently in live events than it used to, but the team still maintain and upgrade the robot, even after 25 years of battle. The William Afton of Robot Wars still has life in him yet. From what will probably be the longest segment in the whole series to a much shorter one now, B.O.D was a featherweight robot that competed in both Extreme 2's and Series 7's competitions. It was one of the more successful featherweights, as although it never won a title, it still made the final on both occasions. Like many featherweights, B.O.D's design was simple, a wedge with a circular saw, although in practice this weapon was almost never used, with B.O.D instead being more effectively deployed as a rambot. In Extreme 2 it fell short of the title after being left stranded over the pit by eventual champion Arc. It then suffered the exact same fate in the final of Series 7 featherweight tournament, once again ending up in the pit at the hands of DTK. The first in a series of 2 robots, the Berserk machines will be split up into their own segments due to the robots being very different from one another and also jumping around weight categories. The first Berserk is less remembered as it only appeared in a super heavyweight side event in Series 2. It progressed through the qualifier, even being able to overturn Sergeant Bass during the battle, but it lost in the final and the team ultimately built a successor, this time competing in the main competition. Speaking of,
From Huddersfield, seed number 24, Berserk 2.
Berserk 2 built upon the lifter weapon of its predecessor as well as adding a spiked axe to the front. The Berserk team was the only team in Series 3 and 4 to be comprised of 4 team members, as team captain Stuart Ford was deaf and appeared on the show and in the control booth with a translator and communicated in interviews via sign language. Debuting in Series 3, it proved to be slow but steady, effectively using its lifter to secure KO victories over both Tut's Revenge and Alligator, earning a heat final bout with Hypnodisc. By Series 3 standards, Berserk 2's steel shell was immensely strong. as was shown when it famously resisted the spinner of Hypnodisc, suffering little to no damage from a robot who until that point had been sending its opponents home in bin bags. It even managed to get a few attacks in on Hypnodisc, although it did suffer a scare from the arena spike. Ultimately, the battle went to the judges, and the judges sided with Hypnodisc. Still, Berserk 2 had performed well enough to be seeded 24th when it returned for Series 4. It essentially received a free pass through the first round of its heat as Invertebrate malfunctioned and was left immobile. Between Series 3 and 4, the team had swapped out the steel shell for an aluminium one. This led to the robot losing its famed integrity. This, combined with the fact that it was still pretty slow, led to it being bullied by newcomer Tornado in the second round, with the future All-Star slamming Berserk 2 into the wall several times until it broke down. It was pitted by the House Robots, and the team would retire Berserk 2 and return for Series 5 with a new machine.
From Brighton, Big Brother.
Big Brother was the debut machine of the team by the same name, who would go on to be one of the most beloved and successful teams during the show's original run, but that was a different machine to this one. As such, Big Brother can sometimes be overlooked despite having success in its own right, as well as introducing us to this wonderful team. Big Brother was a wedge-shaped robot featuring a strange flail mace type weapon. A father-son team, it was built by Ian Watts, although team captain was the 7-year-old Joe. He quickly became a favourite of both fans and pit reporter Philippa Forrester. By the way, you want to feel old? Joe Watts is in his 30s now. It survived the judge's decision against the Grim Reaper, despite getting ran over by Sakillalot, before overturning Sakromalot to advance to the heat final. Here, despite starting well, its flail got caught in the axe of Ultor before eventually falling off entirely. The judges ruled in favour of Ultor, much to little Joe's disappointment, but after the fight, the Ultor team approached the Big Brother team and announced that they would be conceding their spot in the semi-finals to them, as they felt the judge's decision was wrong. The actual reason, however, was that Ultor wouldn't have been able to attend the filming of the semi-finals due to work commitments, so they offered their spot to Big Brother. Big Brother was never seen on Robot Wars again, being replaced with a successor. It made a brief cameo when the Big Brother team appeared on BattleBots, but other than that, nothing. According to Ian Watts, Big Brother still exists and is in his possession.
From Cone in Lancashire, Big Nipper.
Of the robots whose career straddled both the classic era and the reboot era, with the exception of Terahertz and Behemoth, most had drastically different fortunes and competitiveness in the two eras. Robots like Thor and Sabretooth saw vast improvements during the show's hiatus and only became icons during the reboot, while robots like Thermidor 2 and Razor were classic era legends but were shadows of their former selves on their sole reboot appearances, having been left behind as technology improved. Big Nipper was arguably the only robot in this category to have actually peaked and had its best years during the hiatus of the show. First appearing in Series 5, Big Nipper was a low invertible box with a set of clamping jaws, resembling those of a stag beetle, attached to a lifting mechanism. The armour was made of titanium, however it was only 1mm thick. It would be eliminated in the first round by Razor, as despite putting up a good fight and even knocking off one of the latter's self-righting wings, Big Nipper's armour was just too flimsy and would become the first robot to fall during Razor's title-winning campaign, although the Razor team commended their opponent and commented on how impressed they were with it. After this, Big Nipper was upgraded and redesigned. This included increasing the armour's thickness by a factor of 10, and restructuring the jaws into a flexible arm that would become a staple of the robot going forward. This arm could in theory allow the robot to lift an opponent clean over the arena wall. The lifter had a capacity of 200 kilos and the jaws had a crushing force of 1.5 tons. Unfortunately, this new Big Nipper was only finished 2 weeks before the filming of Series 6, so they decided not to attend, instead returning for Series 7. It would progress through the heat melee after a memorable joust with the Grim Reaper, did just enough to impress the judges. It then delivered a comprehensive win over Jackson Wallop, helped by the fact that Big Nipper was actually too low to be hit by Jackson's weapon. This gave it a heat final bout with the Grim Reaper, and an opportunity to finally settle their squabble, as the one in the heat melee had ended in a stalemate. Ultimately, this battle would as well. Big Nipper started the battle well, carrying the Grim Reaper around. Unfortunately, it spent much of the middle part of the battle pinned in a CPZ, getting flipped several times. As a result, although it ended in the ascendancy, the judges sided with Grim Reaper, although it was an extremely close battle, one of the closest heat finals of the series. Big Nipper would go on to enjoy considerable success at live events during the show's hiatus, finishing 3rd in 2004, 4th in 2005, 3rd again in 2006. Here, Big Nipper was one of the robots involved in a fight that resulted in heavyweight spinners being banned from live events for 11 years, until the readers became safe enough. Big Nipper finally broke through in 2007 to win the FRA UK Championship. It would achieve another 3rd place in 2008, 4th in 2009, making it 6 straight top 4 finishes. In 2012 it would become one of only 5 robots to win more than one title, overcoming Maelstrom in the final. It would then achieve an 8th top 4 finish in 2014. Big Nipper was one of many veterans to return for the reboot of the show, now sporting some modern versatility, as it could swap out the crushing George for a vertical spinner between fights. It would survive the group battle despite coming perilously close to an embarrassing self-pitting. It then repeated this dance with the pit during its first head-to-head, only this time TR2 was quick enough to punish such careless driving, resulting in a loss. A knockout win against King Bee Remix left Big Nipper to fight in a battle with Dan Tomkia, with the winner claiming a spot in the heat final alongside TR2. However, it would lose on a judge's decision after playing a much more passive role in the fight than its opponent, as well as running afoul of Sekilala on several occasions, although the last time did hilariously result in the hulking colossus of the house robot impaling his lance through the arena wall and getting stuck. Big Nipper took another hiatus from our screens for Series 9, being an unused reserve, but returned for Series 10. Here it would lose in the group battle after a bolt became loose and jammed up one of the wheels, and it was cast into the redemption round. Here it would earn a place in the Heat semi-finals by defeating the Clusterbot, Crackers and Smash. This included what is arguably considered the reboot's Wheelie Big Cheese vs Axel moment, as Big Nipper absolutely launched Smash into the air and out of the arena, so high that it actually collided with the ceiling lights. It would lose its semi-final bout against eventual champions Eruption, once again engaging in a very passive display of driving. But if that fight lacked aggression, then they sure made up for it in the 3rd place playoff. During a brutal slugfest against Aftershock, the 2 spinners sent each other hurtling across the arena, with Noel Sharkey expressing shock that the 2 machines were still running. However, Big Nipper eventually delivered a knockout blow, earning a famous victory as well as granting it access to the 10-robot Rumble. Here it would use its claws for the first time in that series, as they gave the robot a much longer battery life compared to the spinner configuration. Despite putting up a good fight, harrying Eruption and lifting over Apollo, it eventually found itself on the edge of the pit. Eruption was quick to capitalise and Big Nipper became one of several robots down in that pit by the end of the battle. Big Nipper also did its part for the UK in the World Series, winning both of its battles. Its head-to-head with Terror Turtle would prove to be Big Nipper's final fight in any capacity, as it never attended a live event since, appearing at RoboNerd in 2019, still sporting its Union Jack paint job from the World Series. The team confirmed that Big Nipper was officially retired. Glenn Dawson, who was part of the team for the 2 reboot series, sadly passed away in August 2023.
From Brighton in East Sussex and the number 2 seed, Bigger Brother.
A nightmare in metal and one of only 10 robots to amass 20 combat victories. Yet it sort of came out of nowhere. After building Big Brother, a respectable but not spectacular robot for Series 3, Ian Watts and son Joe were back for Series 4 with Bigger Brother. A thorough redesign of their previous entry, Bigger Brother took inspiration from the rear hinge flipper of Chaos 2. Their arm, along with the whole robot, was designed to be small, compact and effective, with a lifting capacity of half a ton. The robot was also designed to allow for efficient self-righting as possible, in order to not waste gas supply, righting itself with a gentle flick as opposed to launching itself over. Granted the 14th seed for Series 4 based on the legacy of its predecessor, it took on a pair of newcomers in its group battle, Hammer and Tong and the war crew of Claude Hopper. Hammer and Tong proved to be too awkward for Big Brother's small flipper to topple, so instead it turned its attention to Claude Hopper, successfully dispatching the ponderous Walkerbot. It advanced to a second round clash with Bulldog Breed 2, however Bigger Brother had sustained damage to its gas ram. This damage then caused excessive venting of CO2 during the fight with Bulldog Breed, leaving the flipper without sufficient power after only a couple of flips. Bulldog Breed then flipped Bigger Brother over, a position from which it was stuck and helpless. However, it was the heavyweight weight increase that allowed Bigger Brother's career to take a turn. It allowed the team to return with a much more powerful flipper as well as more sturdy armour, titanium salvaged from a scrapped MiG-29, with the capacity to add extra panels of armour depending on the type of weapon that it was facing. On top of this, all the internals and electronics were now shock mounted to prevent impact-induced failure. The team also grew in size, with Joe's little sister Ellie appearing alongside her brother and father. While the Bigger Brother didn't make much of a splash in Extreme, only winning one of its 3 fights, it was in Series 5 that Bigger Brother really turned it up a notch. Returning unseeded, Bigger Brother proceeded to knock out 2 opponents in under a minute of battle time combined. Bigger Brother was much more effective and better driven, and 9-year-old Joe proved to himself to be a capable weapons operator, throwing over Tip Top and the seeded Splinter over the arena wall. Even though it faced the 8th seed in the heat final, there was no question who the favourite was. Bigger Brother had dominated its heat, and said 8th seed was 3 steaks to heaven. Bigger Brother easily toppled its opponent, even if it wasn't able to flip it out of the arena, opting to go pick a fight with a house robot instead. Bigger Brother's post-heat run was one for the ages, and perhaps the greatest of any robot that didn't go on to win the series outright. First, it rapidly eliminated S3, taking advantage of its opponent's poor manoeuvrability to nearly flip it out the arena twice, and send it down the pit, while suffering only a single blow from the devilish spinner, even if Ian Watts did nearly drive into the pit himself right after S3. One robot stood between Bigger Brother and the grand final, Chaos 2, reigning double champion and until then undefeated in main competition fights, with an 18-0 record. I'd say it was here that Chaos 2's age and need to be upgraded was laid bare, and the torch was truly passed to the new breed of flippers, as Bigger Brother flipped Chaos 2 several times, and although it was flipped itself, it was Chaos 2 who ran out of gas first, leaving it immobile on its back before being counted out and pitted, bringing an end to the most dominant run UK combat robotics has ever seen. If you thought that feat was impressive, how about defeating a fully functioning Hypnodisc that was arguably at the peak of its powers? It was the ultimate come-from-behind victory. Despite tactical driving a heavily reinforced armour, Bigger Brother was beaten, battered and gouged by the flywheel of Hypnodisc. Panels fell off, the flipper broke and fell apart entirely, and yet it still refused to die, having enough life left in it to push the pit button and push Hypnodisc over the edge in one of the greatest shocks the show ever saw and one of its most beloved outcomes, even if it did rob us of a Hypnodisc v Razor final, and what would have been the only time that those two titans ever faced each other. Following the battle, the destroyed Bigger Brother was faced with a monumental repair list. Fortunately, and in a great display of sportsmanship, every team in the pits who was still there lent a hand in fixing Bigger Brother. Well, almost every team. While the grand final was very one-sided, Bigger Brother still did extremely well to hold on until the very end and force the judges to make a decision. That's a feat, even if the judge's decision was very easy. Bigger Brother returned for Series 6 with even thicker armour and the number 2 seed. In the group battle, Bigger Brother dominated, landing flips on all 3 opponents and advancing without issue. A round 2 clash with Behemoth started poorly, getting overturned twice, but Bigger Brother was able to turn it around with a quick series of successful attacks before using its flipper to clamp Behemoth in place before pitting it. In the heat final against Disco Inferno was another commanding display, and a textbook example of how to use a flipper against an invertible opponent. Bigger Brother's fight was tactical, precise, and swift. You wouldn't have believed that the flipper was being controlled by a preteen. Yes, it was helped by the fact that Disco Inferno's weapon failed, but it still earned the win. Disco Inferno even ended the fight on its own accord, deliberately taking a dive into the pit. Bigger Brother proceeded to the semi-finals yet again, facing 6th seed Dominator 2 in round 1. It probably would have been a good fight that either machine could have won, had Bigger Brother not started losing mobility very early on. Such issues got worse and worse until it was functionally immobile, leaving the judges with no choice but to award the win to Dominator 2. Series 5 and 6 however featured a losers melee, where the 3 losers in round 1 of the semi-finals would go at one last shot at redemption. Here Bigger Brother would face Hypnodisc and spawn again. It would be the most reliable machine that would win the day. Hypnodisc broke down after slamming into the wall and spawned again broke down because of course it did. A place in a second successive grand final beckoned, but Terahertz was in the way. The surprise package of Series 6, Terahertz would add Bigger Brother to its highlight wheel, dispatching the Watts family machine with the same violence that it had defeated the likes of Spawn Again and Panic Attack. With 2 back-to-back heat victories including a grand final appearance, Bigger Brother had graduated to All-Star and would appear in the All-Stars tournament during the second series of Extreme. It started so well. In the group battles against S3 and Firestorm 4, Bigger Brother would do what it failed to do in Series 5 and get S3 out of the arena, adding another robot to Little Joe Watts' kill count. Bigger Brother then pulled off an incredible pitting of reigning UK champions Tornado, after a rare and momentary lapse in driving skill from Tornado. However, in a great flipper versus flipper battle with Firestorm 4 in the heat final, Bigger Brother ran out of CO2, which eventually meant that it was left stranded on its back and helpless to stop Firestorm from pushing it down the pit. The Watts family would return for a second tournament in Extreme 2, only this time without Dad, as this was the minor meltdown tournament. Joe would take the controls while little sister Ellie would fire the flipper, and oh boy, they dominated, easily winning all 3 fights, including ending the title fight in just 27 seconds. Seeded 4th for Series 7, Bigger Brother would dominate another group battle despite being drawn in the same battle as eventual champion Typhoon 2. In fact, Bigger Brother would be the virtually only flipper Typhoon 2 faced that even gave them a scare, successfully flipping the champions to be. Typhoon 2 was only saved from a first round exit by the fact that the ref bot counted out the other two opponents first. Bigger Brother was then faced with longtime competitors Iron Ore in the second round, a fight that it was heavily favoured to win. Bigger Brother was part of several great fights and underdog moments in his career, sometimes both at once. However, this time the shoe was on the other foot. Bigger Brother was briefly distracted by a house robot, and Iron Ore took advantage and tossed the seeded machine out of the arena in one of the biggest shocks in Robot Wars history. In its last battle on TV, Bigger Brother was also part of turning an all-star battle into an impromptu rebellion against the house robots, until Cat 3 broke the truce and Bigger Brother wound up losing the fight, marking the end of its Robot Wars life. Off-screen, Bigger Brother would continue to compete at live events all the way up until around 2018. In 2010 it also appeared on the reality TV show Big Brother. Other versions of the machine would also go across the pond to compete in BattleBots under the name Little Sister. Ian Watts still owns his machine, and occasionally brings it out to conventions and also as a demonstration at the University of Brighton, where he works as a lecturer, although the robot is now heavily rusted after decades of oxidation. Regardless of its internal state, it looks ancient, and in a way, kind of sad. Ian Watts would return with new machines when the reboot series came along, joined by third and youngest child Sam. However, Joe and Ellie, now both adults, did not return. Joe now works as a software engineer, and according to Ian, both have a standing invitation to rejoin the team whenever they like. Well built, well driven and deadly, with every single one of its 19 UK victories coming via knockout, 3 Ooters and a second place finish in Series 5, Bigger Brother will always be a legend of robot combat.
From Kent, Binky.
Binky was a robot that was initially never meant to make it to screen. It failed to qualify for Series 3 but was in attendance of the filming as a reserve robot. Then, when competitor Daisy was forced to withdraw due to mechanical issues, Binky was substituted into the first round in its place. Binky was a drum-shaped robot with a snowplow type weapon that operated like a turret, rotating through 360 degrees. Its 80cc engine from a scooter meant that the team claimed it could travel at 50 miles an hour, but given how sluggish it appeared to be in its only fight, I'm gonna have to call you bluff on that one, Chief. Speaking of its only fight, it was against fellow newcomer Agrobot. Both robots were about as toothless as each other, so almost no damage was inflicted until Binky eventually ground to a halt before being set upon by the house robots. It was eliminated and the team would never be seen again on Robot Wars.
From fish ponds in Bristol, Black and Blue.
This competitor was built by the team most famous for building Mousetrap. After their newest evolution had failed to qualify for Series 6, the team went away and created a new machine, Clusterbot, that consisted of 2 identical halves, each armed with a 20kg spinner, meaning the weapons took up 40% of the robot's total weight. It might seem foolish, but this was one of the ways to make Clusterbots more viable. Their comparatively small per robot weight means they'll always get bodied in a 1v1 with a normal heavyweight, so a small and agile machine with a deadly enough weapon like a spinner could be perfect for scoring quick hits and then dividing attention. However, when it appeared in Series 7, it proved to not be agile enough. It struggled to avoid the flipper of Firestorm 5, not helped by Black and Blue's large ground clearance. Black would be immobilised by the newcomer Daisy Cutter, while Blue would be pitted by Firestorm 5, and the brief career of the last Clusterbot to appear in the classic series would come to an end.
From Automonster in Germany, Black Hole.
As Robot Wars became more and more popular, other countries began getting involved, with some even hosting their own spin-off Robot Wars shows. Some of the very best would even come over to the UK and achieve success over here as well. Gravity, Tough as Nails, Tsunami. Yet of those machines who should have achieved UK success, there's one that stands out for the simple reason that it didn't. Black Hole was a robot that had an unorthodox but highly effective spinner design. It was one of, if not the best German machine around, as was shown when it won the only series of German Robot Wars, beating out the aforementioned Tsunami. It would make its first appearance in the UK screens in the second series of Robot Wars Extreme. In the European Championship, it made an immediate impact as it achieved a destructive and comprehensive win over Italian robot Zeus. In the semi-final, Black Hole would face Belgian machine Philippa 2 for a place in the final and an opportunity to fight reigning UK champion Tornado. It looked like it was going to be another bloodbath as Black Hole tore into Philippa's armour, until in a shocking turn of events, Black Hole drove up Philippa's flipper and was pushed down into the pits. Unlike all the machines I mentioned at the top of this piece, Black Hole would never appear in a UK series. In fact, it wouldn't even appear on UK TV again. as it didn't return to compete in the Third World Championship either. We had finally been given a promising German machine, and yet it was all taken away from us before it had even gotten a chance to fight a UK All-Star. The team would go on to build a successor to Black Hole, inspired by, funnily enough, Tornado. This machine was then sold in 2004, rebuilt and refurbished. Meanwhile, the original Black Hole would be scrapped at some point in 2011.
From Brampton in Oxfordshire, Black Widow.
As much as we love it, it's important to remember that Robot Wars was a show whose main goal was to be entertaining, and if any robot was a victim of that desire for entertainment, it was Black Widow. I'm sure it had all the love and care put into it that every other machine had. Designed to look like a spider, it supported itself on many legs and had an axe weapon on the top. But you can just ignore that because, let's be honest, this is a walker, simply moving would be challenging enough. Only appearing in Series 5, it was placed against Hypnodisc in a pretty transparent and sadistic move by the producers who wanted to watch this spider get all of its legs pulled off. I mean, it could have been a result of a random draw, but come on, we're all adults here. Black Widow was left crippled after only a couple of attacks and was helpless to stop Hypnodisc ripping legs off, even though it did flay its axe valiantly without hitting anything. It was eventually set upon by the house robots and placed on the flipper, although due to its weight as a walker, it actually took 2 attempts to get a clean flip on the machine. Black Widow ended its life being beaten and bellied up, like most spiders.
From Newbury, Blade.
If you ever wanted an epitome as to how sound construction and design was more important in the early days of the show than weaponry, look no further than Blade. A Y-shaped robot with a lawnmower blade nicked from one of the team members' mothers, it didn't matter that this weapon didn't do much as Blade was reliable and well built, and such characteristics would carry you far in early Robot Wars. It even managed to withstand an axe blow from Shunt, which is impressive given the robot only cost about 150 quid to build out of assorted car parts. It made its only appearance in Series 3, where it required a justification to get out of the first round against Spike, but it was declared the winner. It would then advance through to the heat final despite a scare of getting flicked up by the arena Spike, as it was righted and then shepherded Agent Orange into the tusks of Matilda, which caused structural damage. This was enough to give Blade the edge on the judge's decision, although it wasn't a unanimous one. It then ground down Agrobot in the heat final using its superior pushing power to earn a deserved, if understated, place in the semi-finals. Although this was the same heat that Razor appeared in, and I do wonder what would have happened if Razor hadn't wet the bed for the second year in a row. I know Blade was stronger than it looked, but I doubt it could withstand Razor. In the first round of the semi-finals, it faced Beast of Bodmin. Here, its high ground clearance as well as Beast of Bodmin's size kneecapped Blade's effectiveness. Beast of Bodmin was able to overturn Blade and leave it stranded on its back, an unrecoverable position since Blade did not have a Shrimek. It wouldn't return for another series, making it one of 3 semi-finalists from Series 3 to only appear in Series 3. Although that said, they were offered a place by the producers and they initially planned to enter under the working name Blade's Big Brother. They were even penciled in as the 14th seeds for Series 4 and appeared in the Robot Wars magazine listed as such. However, at some point before filming, the team changed their minds about entering, as they had been unhappy with the numerous debacles that occurred during the filming of Series 3. Blade's successor was ultimately never built, nor did the original ever compete at live events, and was eventually scrapped not long after Series 3. Sadly, team captain Josh Ainsley passed away in March 2024.
From Gloucester, Bodyhammer.
Now we arrive at the first machine built by the Cold Fusion team, as well as the first of the 6 robots who featured in the grand final of Series 1. Instead of taking place as 1v1 fights as it would in other series, Series 1's grand final was simply a 6-robot free-for-all melee consisting of every heat winner, with the last one standing being the champion. In the first series, weapons were basically non-existent. What was more important was to have a robot that actually functioned, so I guess it's fitting that a team of nuclear engineers would be able to make it to the grand final. Bodyhammer was a typical Series 1 bod, a polypropylene cone with a small and crude hammer in the front. It was understated in the first 2 rounds, progressing through both without much fuss. In the semi-finals, it successfully immobilised Talk of the Devil on the sidebars before doing the same to Reality in the heat final. In the grand final, Bodyhammer managed to outlast 4 of its 5 opponents, leaving just it and Roadblock left standing. However, Roadblock had been far more dominant during the fight, and by this point Bodyhammer was a dying machine trying to avoid Roadblock. The fight went to the judges, but ultimately the judges came down on the side of Roadblock, and crowned them the inaugural Robot Wars champions. Between series, Bodyhammer was rebuilt over a period of 3 months. The hammer was replaced by a reciprocating spike and a small circular saw. The team also had a new driver, as Series 2 would be the first appearance of David Gribble, who was chosen due to his skills with radio-controlled cars. David would go on to become one of the greatest drivers that Robot-Ous had ever saw, but unfortunately even he couldn't get Bodyhammer through the gauntlet of its heat, after it got stranded on the ram rig. Given that it was seeded 3rd for the series, this makes it the first of 11 seeded robots to be eliminated in the first round, as well as the highest seed to ever fall at that stage. Perhaps sensing their robot was quickly becoming outdated, the team would return with a new machine for Series 3, a machine that was just a little bit more famous.
From Kendall in the Lake District, Bolt from the Blue.
Bolt from the Blue was a robot that was built with a lot of care and attention for a robot built by 16-year-old college students. The robot had a sleek wedge design with an incredibly low ground clearance, especially by Series 4 standards. Above all, they focused on reliable function instead of peak performance. The flipper wasn't very powerful, and it only had a capacity of about 5 or 6 flips per battle, but it would always work. The team also used mechanical speed controllers over electronic ones due to their superior reliability. It easily passed through its group battle in Series 4, as Dietor was immediately disposed of and had no way to self-right. It then drew the short straw by having to fight 5th seed Firestorm 2 in what was an infamously boring battle. The two robots' identical design, as well as Bolt from the Blue's zero ground clearance, meant that despite having the superior weapon, Firestorm struggled to do any damage, having to resort to simply ramming into its opponent over and over. The closest thing to an attack that happened was when Bolt from the Blue lifted Firestorm ever so slightly, unable to turn it fully over. That fight ended with an inevitable judge's decision. This decision went in favour of Firestorm. Bolt from the Blue's team captain James Proctor did not take the loss well, to say the least. After its appearance on the show, the robot was reportedly dismantled and the internals used for a different design that has since been lost to time. In 2017, an image was posted to Reddit by James Proctor's wife of a birthday cake featuring Bolt from the Blue, with the image reporting that James was still bitter about the loss even after more than 15 years.
From Queensland in Australia, Bondi Titch.
This was a robot that travelled a long way, coming all the way from Australia. Except it didn't. Bondi Titch was actually a stock robot that was built by a member of the production team and then simply given to another team. This team was chosen via a competition in Australia. Armed with a hammer and manoeuvrable at 12 miles an hour, the team would show a lack of practice at controlling it, which makes sense given that they didn't actually build it. Only appearing in the Commonwealth Carnage tournament in Extreme 2, it lost in the first round after having a panel torn off by Corkscrew before being ooted by Firestorm 4.
From Stoke-on-Trent,
Here we are, nearly 20 pages and God knows how many minutes of video to get here. The final robot of this episode, Bonk. Shame it couldn't be a robot that at least won a fight, although that's a bit harsh. Bonk did come from a team with pedigree, being built by the same team who brought us the classic series robot Mute. Departing from Mute's design, Bonk was an Axbot with 10-bar full pressure system, as well as a custom-built CO2 system that was designed to keep the robot stable during attacks. Team Mute apparently learnt their lesson after building a robot that once ooted itself. I appreciate Axbots, so it's a shame that this one was really screwed over by two things: the cold temperatures of the reboot arena, and also having to fight Carbide immediately. The cold temperatures in the arena caused the pneumatic system to seize, meaning that although Bonk was aggressive, its attack would be functionally useless after only one attack on Carbide, and the future champion would eventually KO Bonk with one big hit, eliminating it after only one battle.